Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. So what if an ancient text written thousands of years ago claimed to hold the blueprint not just for how the world began, but for why it feels so fundamentally broken today? It's a huge story that lays out an original design, a catastrophic failure, and a long-term plan for redemption. Let's dive in and really unpack this ancient blueprint. It's a question we all ask ourselves, right? We look around at the world, we see conflict, disaster, all our personal struggles, and it's so easy to feel like something is deeply, deeply wrong. And while this feels like a very modern kind of anxiety, the book of Genesis is actually structured to answer this exact problem. It goes all the way back to the beginning to explain the root of what we're all experiencing right now. And this right here, this is the key to unlocking the whole thing. According to this source, Genesis isn't just some dusty old history book. No, it's more like a diagnostic tool. The whole idea is that by understanding the stories of how things were designed to work, we can finally start to make sense of why they seem so completely dysfunctional in our world today. Okay, so to understand what went wrong, we first have to look at the blueprint for what was supposed to be right. This first section is all about the concept of creation, not just as a one-time event, but as the intentional setup of a perfect, functional system. Now, what's really interesting here is the definition of creation. See, it's not just about making something out of nothing. It's about bringing order from chaos, function from emptiness. And get this, it isn't just a cosmic universal event. The same word is used to describe restoring a person's broken heart, creating a clean heart like King David prayed. So it's all about restoring divine order, whether that's in the universe or right inside of us. To really grasp the message of Genesis, you have to picture the world it was written for, a world that was just dominated by pagan ideas. This text was absolutely radical. Instead of a universe run by a bunch of squabbling, manipulatable gods who are part of nature, Genesis drops this bombshell. There is one single, holy creator who exists outside of creation and is the source of all the rules. And instead of using little idols of wood and stone as doorways to the divine, it claims that humanity itself, people, were made to be God's living, breathing image in the world. So that was the blueprint for a perfect world according to Genesis. We're about to get into how it all went wrong. But first, hey, if you're enjoying this exploration of these big ideas, please just take a moment to like this explainer and subscribe to the channel. It really, really helps us continue this work. All right, so if the original design was for a world of perfect harmony and divine order, how did we end up, here? This next section drills down into the one moment that the source identifies as the great fracture point in the whole story of humanity. So the narrative presents this absolutely pivotal moment. It all kicks off with a single challenge from the serpent, who basically questions God's goodness and his truthfulness. And this temptation, it tapped into a really simple desire to define good and evil for themselves, on their own terms. According to the text, that one choice, putting their own will above the Creator's, led directly to the fall, getting kicked out of the garden, and a legacy of rebellion that gets passed down from one generation to the next. But then, right in the middle of this story of failure and consequence, the text inserts this cryptic, mysterious promise. It's actually spoken to the serpent, talking about a future seed of the woman. And this is presented as the very first glimpse of a promised redemption, a little hint that the story isn't over and that the curse will one day be reversed, even though it's going to come at a great cost. Now, the consequences of that one single choice, they didn't just stay in the garden. Not at all. Instead, the source argues that this fracture created a pattern, a kind of ripple effect of conflict that echoes and gets louder and louder through every single story that follows. You can actually see it play out in this clear, escalating timeline. And this just brilliantly shows the escalating consequences. First, the brokenness shows up between two brothers, Cain and Abel, setting the stage for human conflict. Then it just grows and grows until humanity's corruption becomes so widespread that the narrative describes a divine reset with the Great Flood. And then it gets organized. The Tower of Babel represents a unified, technological, and intentional rebellion against God's plan. So the whole point about the Tower of Babel isn't just that they built a tall building. No, it was the motivation, the why behind it. It's portrayed as this project of just profound pride, an attempt to reach up to God's throne, to outsmart him by building a flood-proof city, and, most importantly, to make a great name for themselves and resist his command to spread out and fill the earth. They wanted to build a monument to their own power in direct opposition to the divine agenda. So after all this rebellion and fracture, what's the solution? Well, the final part of the Genesis narrative introduces the framework for the cure. And it's a long-term plan to fix this broken world, not by force, but through a series of binding agreements. The key concept here is covenant. Think of it like a binding promise, a partnership between God and humanity that's all about restoration. And this divine plan, according to Genesis, really kicks into high gear with one man, Abraham. God enters into a covenant with him, promising that through his family line, a blessing will eventually come to the entire world.
And all these covenants, with Noah, Abraham, and other figures later on, they are all pointing toward one ultimate goal. They are all steps in this divine plan to send a Redeemer, that promised seed of the woman from way back in Genesis 3. This person is meant to lead a restored humanity and finally bring creation to the perfect, functional end it was always designed for in the first place.
So when you zoom all the way out, Genesis gives you this complete story arc. It's a narrative that moves from a state of perfect order and design through this catastrophic moment of fracture and all its consequences, and ultimately points towards a promised, divinely led restoration. It's a blueprint for a broken world, sure, but it's also a roadmap for its repair. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This ancient text frames all of human history not as just a random series of events, but as a purposeful, divine redemption plan. So the question is, whether you believe it or not, what does it even mean to consider seeing our complex, chaotic, and often painful world through that particular lens today?